So as I was sitting down to start pitch correcting all the vocal work that we'd done and time aligning the rest of my stacks, I realized that there's an area that I could have covered a little bit better. And rather than redoing a whole video, I decided to just throw in a bonus video over here that covers a different workflow that we can use. So we use some pretty amazing tools like Revoice Pro and Vocaline in addition to some manual editing to really get our vocals into the pocket. But then it dawned on me that maybe not all of the people who are going to be watching this tutorial series are going to have access to those tools. So why don't we look at a different approach that we can take that most DAWs have built in. Now we touched upon this a couple videos back, but I thought we'd go into a little bit more detail in this video. So the first thing I'm going to do over here, I'm going to mute this track over here. Let's just drag this down to the track below. And then you remember that we left a backup here in case we needed to do any work. This is a perfect example of why that's useful. I'm going to go ahead and unmute this, and let's unwrap this audio part over here. Now I'm going to turn my grid snapping on, and because we have our relative grid mode enabled, when I option drag a copy here, you'll notice that it maintains its position relative to the grid. Perfect. So before we go any further, let's just go ahead and create another audio group over here and mute this. All right, so let's have a look at how I would do this manually if I had already done all the work that I could with manual editing, and I still needed to time align these phrases because I couldn't get things to work. I couldn't get them in the pocket. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to zoom to view all of this over here. And we're going to go ahead, we're going to solo these two tracks, and I'm going to pretend that this is my guide track that I'm going to align to. So the first thing I'm going to do here, whenever I do anything like this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new file over here. So we're working with a different file from our clip list. Okay, now I'm going to activate my bend markers by doing a transient detection. Now I can just analyze these points here, and I can just dial this up until I have just as many points as I need. So I think that's probably pretty good at a starting point, and we're going to add some anchors on our own as well. So let's start off with this phrase over here. So first things first, I'm going to zoom in a little bit further. This is the area that we're going to be working on. Okay, I'm going to switch to my audio bend tool, and this is going to allow me to place bend markers in other locations if I need them to anchor things down. Now I'm going to just do a bit of a zoom here so I can really see this phrasing exaggerated. Now keep in mind, because we've already done this transient detection, that if I put a point somewhere over here and I drag, that I'm not messing anything up timing-wise that's happening to the right. That's something to keep in mind, because if you're working and you're not having your anchored points locked down to the right, you're going to be knocking everything else out of time. Okay, so let's start using these audio bend markers that Studio One has created to just bring this into the pocket. So for instance, I can drag this out. This is a visual process as well as something where we have to listen to our work.
This ain't love.
Okay, so that's pretty good. I heard the breath on the right side was just a little longer. Let's pull this back a bit.
This ain't love.
All right, now I'm going to be taking this breath out. I'm going to be doing some manual editing. So let's move along over here. And again, I want to lock down this point. And I can also add another point if I feel that I need to add something here. So for instance, I want to pull this in line with this a little bit more. These two look pretty good, but let's just extend this out a little bit longer. And we're going to have a listen to this.
This ain't love.
Versus.
This ain't love.
So that helped. All right, let's move along over here. Now we have our next section. Let's have a listen to this.
Through.
All right, we're going to have to grab this one over here, and I'm going to have to pull this out, try somewhere around there. Now we're going to have a breath in here, but we're just going to have to ignore that.
Through.
All right, I can edit that breath out. That sounded pretty good. Let's have a look at this one now. Well, I can see that Studio One has put a bend marker here where I don't really see any relevance of it being there. So by holding down a modifier key, most DAWs will allow you to move your anchor points or your warp points or your flex points or whatever they're called. And you can move them to something that's more meaningful. Now this I can pull back so it's just in line. Drop another anchor point down here, and let's pull this out a little bit. Play from here.
This ain't love.
Perfect. All right, moving on. I could add one here if I felt that I needed it. And I can also move these two together. And we can move this, and this allows us to maintain the timing between these two notes, but I can change this a little bit. Let's go ahead and use our modifier key to just pull this on the other side, and I can pull this back a bit too. I think that's going to help, and I might need to just pull this in a tiny bit. Let's have a listen to this.
This ain't love.
Excellent. And now let's go back to the very end. Okay, now this is a difficult one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this one, did a double point. I'm going to just move this over so that it's right in front of this transient over here, as I want to line this up to here. So that's the first thing we'll do. And I'm going to anchor down the back end before I do that. Let's just pull this back, visually lining these up. And then I'm going to have to play with this to get this to work. And I'm probably going to have to do a fade because I can tell that there's a breath or she extends this word in the timing. So let's listen to the two of them.
To
Versus.
To
Okay. So that helped. It was an improvement, but we're going to have to do some manual editing. I'm going to pull this out a little bit more to give myself a little bit of wiggle room, and then we'll do the rest with manual edits. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to choose my pointer tool now. I'm going to get rid of this view, and now I'm going to use some manual editing to clean up all these editing points over here. Okay, so I'm just going to add a fade in, and let's make these two match. We'll go back to where we last played from. All right, that's sounding pretty good. Okay, now let's go back to the very top. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean up all these breaths and all these points with edits over here. So all this breath and everything in here, everything in between here, I don't need any of that. And it's just going to be distracting. So I'll go ahead and clean that up. And we'll just splice everything from this point over here. Got a breath over here. I want to take that out. And breath over here up to this point. We'll take this out and come in. There's another breath over there. Just split that. Get rid of this. Okay, now we're good. So let's move back to the front end here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lasso select all of these. And I'm going to go to my fade in. We're going to add a 10 millisecond fade in just to protect ourselves from any clicks or pops. Let's go ahead and play this now.
this ain't love. This ain't love.
Okay, that sounded good. Let's try from here.
Through this ain't love. This ain't love.
And the last one.
To
Okay, I'm hearing a tiny bit of grain in there, and that's because I didn't double check which algorithm is being applied to this process. So in most DAWs, you can choose. In this case, it's set to drums. I can choose either Solo Pro Formant or Audio Band Elastic Pro. Either one of these is going to do good, but I think I'm going to go with the Solo. And that should probably clear up any artifacts that we had.
to
Okay, so that sounds a bit better. So that's how you would go about doing this with the native tools that are built into most popular DAWs these days if you didn't have access to tools like Revoice Pro or Vocaline. A little bit of manual editing and manipulating the time compression and expansion using your DAW's inbuilt native functions. I'll catch you in the next video.